The high priest stepped forward, holding a wooden bowl filled with thick, dark liquid. "This is the elixir of sight, made from the blood of the ancestors and the roots of the Odan tree. Drink, and your spirit shall be open to truths no ordinary eyes can see." Luke hesitated for only a moment before taking the bowl and drinking. The liquid was bitter, thick, and it burned as it slid down his throat. Almost instantly, his vision blurred, the world around him spinning into a haze of colors. The drumming of the priests grew louder, deeper, until it felt like it was inside his chest. Luke sat beside Elodie in their small family home, watching as she hummed softly to herself, testing the strength of her newly returned voice. It wasn't as strong as before, but there was something different about it, richer, deeper, as though she had been reborn through fire. "You sound amazing," Luke said, offering her a smile. Elodie sighed, touching her throat. "It's still a little weak, but I can feel it coming back. It's strange, Luke. I remember everything, how the music flowed so easily before, but when I try to push my voice, it's like something is still missing." Luke frowned, his mind immediately going back to the ruins of Sweet Whispers and the confrontation with Abina. The destruction of the jars had restored the stolen destinies, but had it fully undone her magic? Or had she left something behind? "I won't let her take anything from you again," Luke said firmly, clenching his fists. Elodie glanced at him. "You should be careful, Luke. Abina, she's not like the others in the village. She knows things. She's dangerous." Luke exhaled slowly. He knew Elodie was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't finished. He had won a battle, but Abina was still out there, and he doubted she was the type to simply disappear. He was right. Late that night, as the village settled into sleep, a shadow moved through the trees. Abina watched from a distance, hidden behind a thick grove of palm trees, her sharp eyes locked onto the dimly lit window of Luke and Elodie's home. The air around her crackled with restrained power, the remnants of her broken spells still lingering beneath her skin. She had spent years weaving her magic undisturbed. She had built an empire in secrecy, delivering stolen fates to the highest bidder, and now it had all been undone by a single boy. Luke had taken everything from her. Now she would take everything from him. A slow, wicked smile curled across her lips. She wasn't going to steal his future just yet. No, Luke was strong-willed, difficult to manipulate through ordinary means. He had destroyed her work before, and if she wasn't careful, he could do it again. She needed to break him first, make him doubt himself, make him weak. Only then could she take what she needed. Abina whispered an incantation, her voice curling through the night air like smoke. "Your mind shall wander, your dreams shall twist, doubt shall creep where courage sits. A fate unseen, a shadow's call, till truth is blurred and fear takes all." The wind shifted, the magic settled, and inside the house, Luke, fast asleep, began to dream. Luke's dreams were vivid, almost too real. He was standing in the village square, but something was wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, and the people around him were blurred figures, their faces indistinct. "Elodie," he called out, but his voice felt distant. He turned, and suddenly there she was, standing on the stage at the festival, just as she had before. But when she opened her mouth to sing, no sound came out. Instead, blood trickled from her lips. Luke recoiled. No, this isn't real." The villagers started laughing. Their laughter twisted into something sinister, echoing in the empty air. Then he saw her, Abina. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching him with those eyes, filled with amusement, with hunger. "You think you can stop me, Luke?" she asked, tilting her head. "You have no idea what you've done." Luke tried to move, but his feet were heavy. The world around him darkened, and the voices turned to whispers. "You will fail. You will lose her again. You cannot win." The shadows stretched toward him, clawing at his skin. Luke gasped, jerking awake. His heart pounded violently in his chest. He was in his room, drenched in sweat, the lingering echoes of the whispers still pressing against his skull. A dream. But it hadn't felt like a dream. It felt like a warning. Luke barely slept the next few nights. The nightmares continued, growing worse each time. Abina was inside his head. He could feel it. She wasn't coming for him direct, she was weak, her power not yet fully restored. But she was planting seeds of doubt, making him question everything. Was he truly strong enough to stop her? Had he really saved Elodie, or was this just another trick? Luke knew what she wanted. She wanted him tired, vulnerable. And if she thought she could break him that easily, she was wrong. Determined, Luke made a decision. He was going to find Abina before she could strike again. And this time, he would finish what he started. Before Luke became the boy who uncovered Abina's dark secret, before he shattered the jars of stolen destinies, he was just a child with a family that had been touched by her magic long before he ever realized it. Luke was only 6 years old when his father, Kojo, disappeared. Kojo was once a brilliant craftsman, known throughout Essumaja and beyond for his ability to carve wood into masterpieces. He didn't just make furniture, he created art. People traveled from distant villages just to purchase his work. His hands were his gift, his livelihood, his legacy. But then, one day, it all changed. Luke remembered it well. His father had been working on his finest piece yet, a throne, for a visiting chief who had heard of his talent. It was supposed to be Kojo's masterpiece, the one that would finally bring their family the wealth and recognition he had worked so hard for. Then, on the morning of the final carving, Kojo walked into Sweet Whispers. Luke had been with him that day, holding his father's hand as they walked through the market. The scent of warm pastries lured them in, and Abina greeted them with her usual charm. "Master Kojo," she had said, smiling warmly. "Your hands must be tired from all your hard work. Here, try this, it will give you the strength to finish your masterpiece." She handed him a small, honey-drizzled pastry. Luke still remembered the way his father hesitated for just a second before biting into it, how he had smiled afterward, thanking Abina for her kindness. And then, the next morning, Kojo sat in his workshop, staring at his unfinished throne. His hands trembled, his tools felt foreign in his grip. The magic had left him. His gift was gone. For weeks he tried to work, tried to carve even the simplest design, but nothing came. His fingers, once steady as stone, could no longer hold a chisel without faltering. His reputation crumbled. The chief took his business elsewhere. And Kojo vanished. One night, without a word, he left their home and never returned. But Luke knew the truth. His father's gift had been stolen. And though he didn't understand it at the time, the memory of that day, the smell of fresh bread, the golden glow of Abina's smile, the way his father had changed overnight stayed with him. It wasn't until years later, when Elodie lost her voice, that Luke began to piece it together. Abina had been doing this for years, and his father had been one of her first victims. This wasn't just about saving Elodie anymore. It wasn't just about protecting Essumaja. It was about justice. It was about vengeance. Luke wasn't just fighting Abina because she stole from Elodie. He was fighting her because she had stolen his family, and he would make sure no one else suffered the way he had. Luke knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. Abina was more than just a cunning woman. She was a witch, a master of forbidden magic. Though he had managed to shatter her jars and free the stolen destinies, he could feel it in his bonesh she was not gone. So, Luke did what his father should have done all those years ago. He went to seek the high priest of Essumaja. The priest, a revered figure known as Okomfo Obadeli, was the village's spiritual guardian, a man rumored to have walked between the realms of the living and the dead. His shrine stood on the outskirts of Essumaja, hidden deep within the sacred groves where only the most desperate souls dared to venture. Luke arrived at the entrance just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the sound of distant drumming echoed from unseen corners of the forest. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside the compound. A group of priests and priestesses sat around a fire, chanting in a low, rhythmic tone. Their eyes flickered toward Luke as he entered, but none of them spoke. They only watched. At the center of the shrine, seated on a raised wooden stool, was Okomfo Obadeli himself. He was an old man, his dark skin weathered by time, his long grey beard adorned with tiny beads and cowries. He wore a flowing white robe, and around his neck hung an amulet carved from black stone, the eye of the ancestors. His presence alone commanded respect. Luke knelt before him, pressing his forehead to the ground. "Okomfo Obadeli," Luke began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "I have come seeking your wisdom and your help." The high priest exhaled deeply, as if he had been expecting him. "Rise, Luke of Esumeha," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "I have heard whispers of your battle. The spirits have spoken of you." Luke lifted his head. "Then you know why I'm here." Obadele nodded. "The witch has returned, though she is weakened. But she is not alone. There are others like her more powerful than her. And now that you have destroyed her work, they will come looking for what was lost." Luke's stomach twisted. "Others?" Obadele's expression darkened. Abina was a mere servant in a greater order, a network of witches who sell destinies to the highest bidder. Some work in secret, while others sit in places of great power, kings, rulers, men who have stolen the talents of others to build their empires. Luke's hands curled into fists. "And now," Obadele continued, "they know your name." Luke swallowed hard. "How can I stop them?" he said, determination burning in his eyes. Obadele studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well," he said. "But know this, Luck. This is not just a battle of strength. It is a battle of spirit. If you walk this path, you will see things no man should see. You will learn truths that will change you forever." Luke took a deep breath. He thought of his father. He thought of Elodie. He thought of the villagers whose dreams had been stolen. Then he looked the high priest in the eye. "I'm ready." Obadele nodded. "Then let us begin." Luke sat cross-legged before the high priest, the warm glow of the shrine's fire casting long shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of burning sage, bitter cola, and ancient oils. Around them the priests and priestesses continued their rhythmic chants, their voices weaving a spell as old as time itself. Okomfo Obadele closed his eyes, exhaling deeply before speaking. "Luke of Esumeha," he began, "you have stepped into a war that most men do not even realize exists. The Order of the Fate Weavers, the secret society of witches who sell destinies, has thrived for centuries. They do not take kindly to those who interfere." Luke nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He already knew that. Abina had made it clear before she vanished there were others, and they were coming. Obadele leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "To fight a spirit, you must first understand the spirit. You must know what fuels them, what weakens them, what binds them to this world." He gestured toward a large wooden bowl filled with dark water. "Look into the waters of sight. Show me your heart, and I will show you what lies ahead." Luke hesitated, then leaned over the bowl, staring into the water's surface. At first he saw nothing but his own reflection, but then the image rippled, and the vision came. Luke found himself standing in the middle of a vast, dark chamber. The walls were lined with glowing jars, far more than what he had seen in Sweet Whispers. Thousands of them, stacked high, pulsating with stolen life. At the center of the chamber sat 6 figures, their faces obscured by golden masks. Their robes were deep red, embroidered with strange symbols that seemed to shift and move like living things. One of them spoke, their voice cold and inhuman. "Abina has failed." Another responded, their tone sharp with displeasure. "Her bakery is lost, her jars are shattered. But the boy is an anomaly. He saw through the veil. He must be dealt with," a third figure hissed. "If he is left unchecked, he will be the first of many. More will rise, and our dominion over fate will crumble." Luke's blood ran cold. They were watching him. They knew who he was. "Then let us do what we have always done," the first figure said. "Find him, take his destiny, make him ours." The vision blurred, and Luke was suddenly back in the shrine, gasping as he pulled away from the water. Okomfo Obadele was already watching him, his eyes filled with understanding. "They have seen you," he said simply. Luke wiped the sweat from his forehead. "I know, and they're coming." The high priest nodded gravely. Yes, but this is not just about you, Luke. If they succeed, they will not stop with you. They will come for Elodie again. They will come for Esumea. They will not stop until all who oppose them are silenced. Luke clenched his fists. Then I have to stop them first. The high priest stood, walking over to a shelf where several ancient weapons lie: a curved dagger, a staff carved with sacred symbols, and a leather-bound book filled with forgotten spells. You will need more than courage to fight them, he said, lifting the book and handing it to Luke. You will need knowledge. Luke took the book, feeling its weight in his hands. You will need power, the high priest continued, picking up a vial of dark liquid. The blood of the ancestors runs through you. You must awaken it. Luke swallowed. How? Obadeli met his gaze. Through initiation. Luke took a deep breath. He knew this was the final step before the real war began. He had always been just a boy from Esumea, but that was no longer who he was. He was no longer just a brother seeking justice. He was a warrior standing at the threshold of a battle greater than himself. And he would not back down. Let's begin, Luke said. Okomfo Obadele smiled. Then prepare yourself, Luke of Esumea. Your fight has only just begun. As the night stretched on, Luke underwent the initiation rites rituals designed to sharpen his spirit, to awaken the gifts buried deep in his bloodline. He would not just be an ordinary man anymore. He would be a hunter of witches, a force the Order of the Fate Weavers had never faced before. But as Luke prepared, far away, in a hidden chamber, the masked figures gathered once more. And in the darkness, a familiar voice whispered, "Give me one more chance." Abina knelt before them, her body weak, her eyes hollow but still burning with determination. "Let me finish what I started." The figures watched her in silence. Then the leader spoke. "Very well, but this time you will not fail." Abina grinned, even as her body trembled. She would have her revenge. And Luke, no matter how strong he became, would not escape his fate. The night air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and sacred oils as Luke knelt before Okomfo Obadele, the high priest of Esumea. The flickering light from the fire cast eerie shadows across the shrine, illuminating the carved symbols that lined the ancient walls. Luke had agreed to undergo the initiation of the spirit warriors, an ancient rite reserved for those who would stand against the forces of dark magic. This was not merely a blessing or a prayer, it was a transformation, one that would awaken the dormant power within him. "Luke of Esumea," Obadele intoned, his voice echoing through the shrine. "You seek to fight those who weave fate in darkness, but to face them, you must no longer be an ordinary man. You must become a hunter of the unseen, a warrior of both body and spirit." Luke swallowed hard but nodded. "I'm ready." The high priest stepped forward, holding a wooden bowl filled with thick, dark liquid. "This is the elixir of sight, made from the blood of the ancestors and the roots of the Odan tree. Drink, and your spirit shall be open to truths no ordinary eyes can see." Luke hesitated for only a moment before taking the bowl and drinking. The liquid was bitter, thick, and it burned as it slid down his throat. Almost instantly, his vision blurred, the world around him spinning into a haze of colors. The drumming of the priests grew louder, deeper, until it felt like it was inside his chest. Then, the world shifted. Luke gasped as he suddenly found himself standing on a vast, endless plain under a night sky unlike any he had ever seen. The stars above were larger, brighter, their light-forming symbols he could almost understand. A voice rumbled through the air. "Look, son of Kojo." Luke turned sharply. Before him stood a towering figure dressed in the robes of an ancient warrior, his body lined with golden tattoos that glowed softly. "You walk a dangerous path, son, but you were always meant to. You are not just a hunter. You are a guardian of fate." Luke's heart pounded. "I don't understand." The warrior stepped closer, placing a strong hand on Luke's shoulder. "Because it has always been you."
Your bloodline was never ordinary. That is why Abina's magic could not take you. That is why you were able to break her spell. You were born to protect the balance.
Luke stared at him, realization washing over him like a tidal wave. "What do I do?" Luke asked. The warrior's eyes darkened.
You must finish what you started. The Fate Weavers will come for you, and when they do, you must be ready.
The world rippled, and Luke was back in the shrine, gasping for breath, his body drenched in sweat. Obadale watched him closely. You have seen the truth, haven't you? Luke, still catching his breath, nodded. All of it. The high priest stepped forward, handing him a small carved dagger. Then take this. This is the ebon blade, forged with the tears of the first hunters. With this, you can cut the ties between a witch and her stolen fates. With this, you can bring true death to Abina and those like her. Luke gripped the dagger, feeling a pulse of power thrumming within it. But how do I wield the sword? The spirits of the warriors before you will guide your path. The battle for Esumeja's fate was about to begin. Far from Esumeja, in a darkened hall lined with glowing jars, Abina knelt before the order of the Fate Weavers. Her body was still weak from the destruction of her bakery, but her eyes burned with newfound rage. You failed us once, the leader intoned from behind his golden mask. And yet you beg for another chance. Abina's fingers curled into fists. Luke was stronger than I expected, but I have learned from my mistakes. I know what he is now. I know how to break him. One of the masked figures leaned forward. And how do you propose to do that? Abina smirked. By taking away the one thing he loves the most. Silence filled the chamber before the leader spoke again. Elodie. Abina nodded. He fights for his sister. His strength comes from his need to protect her. Take her, and he will be nothing. A slow, pleased hum rose among the masked figures. Then it shall be done, the leader said. Bring us the girl, and if Luke dares to challenge the order... The masked figure leaned forward, his voice dripping with menace. We will take his fate for ourselves. Abina grinned, rising to her feet. Consider it done. The war had begun. Luke had barely returned to Esumeja when he felt it. A shift in the air, a tension in the wind. Something was wrong. He sprinted toward his home, heart hammering against his ribs. The village seemed too quiet. The moment he burst through the front door, his worst fear was confirmed. The house was empty. Elodie, Luke called, his voice cracking. Silence. Then he saw a small white envelope sitting on the table, its edges burned with unnatural fire. His hands trembled as he picked it up and unfolded the parchment inside. Look, you took everything from me. Now I will take everything from you. If you want to see your sister again, come to the place where it all began. Sweet whispers. Midnight. Luke's fingers curled around the paper, his knuckles white. Abena. She had taken Elodie. A deep, primal rage surged through him, hotter than anything he had ever felt before. This time, he would not fight just to stop Abena. He would fight to end her. As the moon reached its peak, Luke stood before the ruins of Sweet Whispers, gripping the ebon blade tightly. From the shadows, Abena stepped forward, a smirk on her lips. Behind her, Elodie knelt, bound in thick, glowing ropes of enchanted thread. You came, Abena cooed. Luke's eyes burned with fury. Let her go, Abena chuckled. Or what? You'll kill me? You think you've learned magic, boy, but you're still just a fool with a knife. Luke took a slow breath. He wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't a fool. He knew who he was now. You're wrong, he said, stepping forward. I am Luke of Esumeja, son of Kojo, blood of the Guardians. He raised the ebon blade, feeling the spirits of his ancestors at his back. And tonight I finish what I started. Abena's smile faded. For the first time, she felt fear. And as the winds howled, the final battle began. The ruins of Sweet Whispers stood under the moonlight like a broken monument to Abena's fallen empire. The walls, once lined with shelves of stolen destinies, were now charred and crumbling, but the air still pulsed with lingering magic. Luke stood at the entrance, gripping the ebon blade, his eyes locked onto Abena. She stood with effortless poise, draped in a dark, flowing robe embroidered with the symbols of her ancestors. But beneath her calm facade, Luke could sense the flicker of something else fierce. Behind her, bound by glowing ropes of dark magic, Elodie knelt, her face pale, her voice still weak. "Look, don't!" she started, but Abina silenced her with a flick of her wrist. The ropes tightened, and Elodie gasped in pain. Luke's knuckles turned white around the hilt of his dagger. "Let her go." Abina sighed dramatically, tilting her head. "Oh, Luke," she purred, stepping forward. "You think you're some grand warrior now, don't you? That you can walk into the darkness and slay the witch?" She smirked. "But you don't understand. You are in my world now." With a snap of her fingers, the ruins shifted. The shadows deepened, stretching unnaturally as the air grew thick and heavy. The ground beneath them trembled as dark tendrils of mist curled around Luke's feet. A spell, a trap. Luke forced himself to stay steady. This wasn't the time to let fear take hold. He was ready. Abina lifted her arms, her eyes glowing a deep, sinister gold. "You have interfered with the fate weavers, Luke. You have broken what was meant to be unbroken." Her voice echoed unnaturally, layered with something otherworldly. Luke braced himself. "You have stolen from me," Abina continued, "and now I will take from you." The wind howled as the magic surged. With a single gesture, shadow-like creatures emerged from the ground, their twisted forms shifting between solid and mist. They had no faces, only hollow pits where eyes should have been, and they moved with unnatural speed, closing in around Luke. Luke exhaled sharply, raising the ebon blade as energy surged through him like never before. The first creature lunged. Luke moved. He dodged left, slashing at the shadow's torso. The ebon blade sliced cleanly through it, and the creature let out a piercing screech before dissolving into smoke. More attacks. Luke ducked, sidestepped, his movements fluid, precise. But there were too many. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder as one of the creatures clawed him, and he stumbled back, gritting his teeth. Abina laughed. "You fight well, boy, but you are alone. You cannot win." Luke wiped blood from his lip. "You're wrong." Abina's smirk faltered slightly. Luke tightened his grip on the blade, his voice steady. "I have something you'll never have, Abina." She raised a brow. "Oh? And what is that?" Luke closed his eyes. He focused. He felt the presence of those who had come before him, the spirits of his ancestors, the guardians of fate. He felt his father, Kojo, standing behind him, whispering the strength of generations into his soul. And when he opened his eyes, they burned with light. "I have my bloodline," Luke said, "and I have my sister." Elodie gasped as a faint glow began to surround her. The magic binding her trembled, flickering, weakening. Abina's eyes widened. "No." Luke moved. Fast. Before Abina could react, he lunged forward, dodging the last of the creatures and thrusting the ebon blade directly into her chest. Abina let out a strangled gasp. The air shattered around them, the magic breaking apart like cracked glass. The dark mist vanished, the creatures dissolved, and the world shifted back to reality. Luke stepped back, watching as Abina staggered, clutching the blade still buried in her chest. She looked up at him, her golden eyes dimming. "This is not over," she whispered. Luke stared at her, unyielding. "Yes, it is." With one final breath, Abina collapsed. Her body disintegrated into ash, carried away by the wind. The fight was over. Luke turned to Elodie, rushing to her side as the last of the dark magic around her faded. She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. Luke pulled her into a tight embrace. "We did it," he corrected, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in a long time, the night was quiet. The village of Esumeja awoke the next morning to a new dawn, untouched by the lingering shadow of sweet whispers. Luke and Elodie returned home, exhausted but victorious. News of Abina's demise spread quickly, and though many villagers had never known the extent of her crimes, they felt the difference. The air was lighter, the village brighter. Didi the weaver found her hands steady again, her fingers once more weaving beautiful patterns into cloth. Kofi, the fisherman, returned to the river and found his luck had returned. Amma, the scholar, woke up with a hunger for knowledge she hadn't felt in years. And Elodie, her voice returned fully. That night, she sang by the river, her melody weaving through the trees like magic, not the dark magic of Abina, but the pure magic of a soul set free. Luke sat beside her, listening, his heart finally at peace. "You're smiling," Elodie teased. "That's rare." Luke chuckled. "I guess I finally have a reason to." Elodie nudged him. "So what happens now, with Abina gone?" Luke's smile faded slightly. He thought of what Okomfo Obadele had told him. "The Fate Weavers will come for you." Abina had been one part of a much larger problem, and if the masked figures in his vision were real, then this was far from over. Luke exhaled, watching the stars. "Now," he murmured, "now, I prepare for what's coming next." Elodie frowned. "You think someone else will try to take her place?" Luke didn't answer immediately. He simply turned the ebon blade over in his hand, watching the way the metal glowed faintly in the moonlight. He had won this battle, but the war was just beginning.